Okay, welcome everyone to the webinar CitiesLEAP Approach, Helping Cities with Energy Analysis and Planning. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory, with the support from the U.S. Department of Energy, has developed original replicable methodologies to estimate sector-specific energy data for every U.S. city. Currently, the National Renewable Energy Lab is working with 10 cities to demonstrate pathways from data to decision-making, using the data generated through the CitiesLEAP and available on the state and local energy data site, so to help cities make more strategic energy decisions. Today, Megan Day will present the approaches taken for data collection and the types of analysis to inform municipal energy planning using the CitiesLEAP toolbox with the experience of the United States, focusing on how the data collected by using the CitiesLEAP toolbox can be used to better inform the policy-making processes for urban energy planning. Megan Day is a project leader in the Strategy, Policy, and Implementation Group from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the United States of America. She's a certified planner leading analysis and technical assistance on local renewable energy planning at the NREL. She manages the city's leading through energy analysis and planning, also called CitiesLEAP project, which provides city-level analysis and data for every U.S. city to enable more strategic energy decisions. Megan, thank you very much for being with us today, and now the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be with you all, and I wish I had the opportunity to hear more about your work and everyone in attendance. So thank you so much for having me. I unfortunately cannot see the chat while I'm presenting, so if there's any question of import that Thor, you want to jump in and ask during the talk, that's just fine. Otherwise, I'll wait till the end to get to the questions, and we'll leave plenty of time for that and perhaps some discussions. So thank you again. Again, Megan Day with the National Renewable Energy Lab, or NREL. And we'll be talking a little bit about the CitiesLEAP project. So Cities Leading Through Energy Analysis and Planning, or CitiesLEAP, is a project funded by, as Thor said, the Department of Energy, and administered and worked on by the National Renewable Energy Lab. The goal of CitiesLEAP is to deliver standardized, localized energy data and analysis to help enable cities to lead clean energy innovation and to make more strategic energy decisions that are data-based. We're focusing on cities because, as many of you know, global energy is consumed at 70% in cities, and that's only increasing as we become more urbanized in the US and abroad. And so the CitiesLEAP project sought to address energy consumption in cities and help cities with more strategic energy decision-making. And we started with some foundational research. We wanted to understand how cities are currently using data. And this, again, is all focused on US cities, as that's the data set that we had, and we are funded at the national level. And so we looked at a study on trying to understand what kinds of ways cities are currently using data in their decision-making processes and plans. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then we sought to fill some of those gaps that we found in the data and analysis available to cities and the ways in which they were using them. So we created city energy profiles, which I'll talk about as well, for every single US city. And then we used those profiles as a baseline data set on which to understand the aggregate impact of city-level actions as far as greenhouse gas abatement. And there's also an associated funding opportunity announcement that was provided through the Department of Energy. And there are currently 3 city-led teams that are working on innovative ways to incorporate data and analysis in decision-making processes. So I can talk more about that if we have some time. So the foundational research, we looked at 20 different cities and published this technical report, City Level Energy Decision Making, Data Use and Energy Planning, Implementation, and Evaluation in U.S. Cities. We took a look at the plans, and that is either the sustainability plan or the climate action plan or an energy plan in 20 different cities that were chosen because of their geographic diversity, as well as their population diversity and the kind of utility they had, whether it was a municipal utility owned by the city, a cooperative rural electric utility that is basically owned by the members, or an investor-owned utility, which is a privately held company or publicly traded, I should say. And so we cataloged all of the different goals and actions, metrics, and data used in each of those 20 plans to understand how data was used in these different decision-making processes and planning processes. And what we found was, well, laundry lists is a term that we use here, which is sort of a very long and not clearly defined necessarily lists of actions, particularly that cities were taking. And we found that those actions were focused on transportation and land use, as well as buildings and efficiency as the two kind of main categories that most of those, or the highest level of actions, were found in among the different kinds of actions and goals and metrics that we found. And here again, we have very long lists. Some cities had over 100 actions that they listed in their single plan. So of all of those hundreds and hundreds of actions, we found that the most common, again, were building certifications and best practices. So this is LEED certification. This is often used in the US. For example, outreach and communication is just education about often the projects and incentives that might be available in a city. And then walkable, complete mixed-use community planning, trying to shift from single occupancy vehicles to mode shifting to walking and biking and transit. So that helped us understand how decisions were being made in cities with this sample. And so, of course, there are a lot of factors that go into all this decision making. Political priorities, of course, among them, staff capacity, but we definitely found that data availability and granularity was a challenge and affected the decision-making process. We found that cities were tending to just list lots of actions with little regard to whether those actions, the impact of those actions would add up to achieving the goals that these cities had set. They lacked the data and the metrics to be able to measure the potential impact and understand where and how to focus and prioritize the actions of the cities. So we set out to try to fill that gap, that data gap, and provide energy data for every single US city. So we created city energy profiles with a data set of now 10 different data components available to every city for 23,400 plus US cities. So what you're seeing here on the map is the city limits of each of those cities. There's a lot of unincorporated areas where it's not within a city across the US. And then in the Northeast, you'll see a lot of coverage because we added in minor civil divisions, which is a census definition, which includes things like towns and townships in the Northeast there. So I'm going to go through the city energy profiles, and I invite you, if you'd like, to follow along on the website and explore whichever city, US city, that you might be interested in or be familiar with. So the link here is at the bottom of this page, but you can also, in the US, I'm sure the search engines work differently abroad, but you can Google DOE space SLED, and that stands for Department of Energy, State and Local Energy Data. And all of the data that we compiled, we've made publicly available through the State and Local Energy Data site, which is shown on the link at the bottom. So if you go to that site, you'll see an entry page where you can enter in the zip code or the city name and state of any US city, and it will pull up individual charts such as these for Salem, Massachusetts, and then I'm also showing Cheyenne, Wyoming, just to emphasize that every city is in here. There are even cities with single-digit populations, because that's how many cities we have. And in fact, 91% of the cities, of those 23,000 cities, have populations of 20,000 and below. So there are a lot of very small cities in the US, and we try to include those as well. The data gets a little weird when you get down to that size, but we give it a shot as far as our estimates. So here we're showing the electricity usage and consumption and expenditures, as well as natural gas usage and expenditures. And so we've modeled this by creating a different methodology for each sector, industrial, commercial, and residential, and taking all of the data available, publicly available in this case, to model these kind of energy consumption and also the utility rates so that we can parse out how much people are spending by basically modeling it all the way down to the census tract level. Now, a census tract is a group, a geographic area that incorporates about 2,500 to 8,000 people. And then, so we model all of this energy consumption and expenditures at the census tract level, and then we build it back up to city limits to include all of the census tracts within the city. And so that's how we generated some of these estimates. So you see here, for example, residential energy consumption in Salem, Massachusetts. And then you also see the gray bars, which are cohort averages, and then minimums and maximums. So we wanted to give cities some sort of context to help them understand this data. And so here we've taken a cohort that's generated through an algorithm that pulls the cities with a similar population range, as well as climate zone. And so that cohort is comparing Salem, Massachusetts to other small cities like them as far as climate and population. And so we can see that Salem uses a bit higher than average electricity in the residential sector compared to cities like them and the average of those cities. So this is under the first tab if you're on the website. Electricity and natural gas. And here is the methodology just for, as I said, we modeled each sector with a different methodology depending on the data available. We have the most data available for the residential sector, and energy consumption is a little more uniform across households than it is across businesses or factories and industrial uses. So we are feeling more confident about the residential estimates than we are about the commercial and certainly industrial estimates, also because of the additional data available. So this is just a very quick outline of how we compiled the estimate and the methodology that we used. And we can go into that in more detail, but basically what we used was an iterative proportional fitting methodology, which is a massive cross-tabulation of all the data available at each census tract level, and then kind of running that through multiple times to refine it and bring in different data sets and better understand that city level consumption and expenditures. So we also modeled fuel consumption and vehicle miles traveled within each city. A lot of times in the US, you'll have a regional planning organization that will have an estimate for the region as far as fuel consumption and vehicle miles traveled. But we wanted to provide that data again at the city-specific level so that cities could make decisions based on their own context for energy consumption, and in this case, fuel use. So the fuel use is actually, I think, a really interesting methodology. Here we have, in electricity and natural gas, we are estimating data, and a lot of cities have measured actual data from their utility. But for fuel consumption and vehicle miles traveled, everyone is is making an estimate, right? There is no actual measured with a certain degree of accuracy. So we're pretty excited about the fuel use methodology that we've come up with, because we use what's available in the US, which is vehicle miles traveled per road segment from the Highway Administration. And then we added in some data that we have at NREL, which is purchased, which is bulk vehicle registration data. So it has the data by zip code for every single registered vehicle in the US. And so we've weighted the fuel consumption along those road segments by the fuel economy of the cars that are registered in the same zip code. So it's just a weighting, it's not entirely determinative. But we feel that that's an added piece of data that can help make that estimate more accurate. And then vehicle miles traveled, we show the total, the per capita, as well as a breakdown by road class, the different types of roads that are seeing those vehicle miles traveled. So that was under the transportation tab if you're on the website. And then also on the transportation side, we have a breakdown of those registered vehicles from this proprietary purchase data set that we have from Polk and Company. And so here we're able to show in a rounded way, because we can't just deliver that data because it is purchased and they want, of course, the cities to buy it themselves. So we have to give an aggregate estimated number. But here we have a kind of rounded total number of light duty vehicles and the average fuel economy of the light duty vehicles in each city. So here in Oakland, California, for this example, it actually has higher than average fuel economy for those vehicles. I know this is probably demonstrative of our lack of fuel economy among our vehicles compared to Europe. But 25.5 miles per gallon is a pretty good fuel economy for those average registered vehicles for Oakland. Most cities I'm seeing have around 22 miles per gallon for their fuel economy average. But then we take a look at what kind of fuel types are among those registered vehicles in each city. So here we have gasoline, as well as a breakout of anything that's basically less than 10%, which tends to be those alternative fuels. And if you are on the website and you scroll over with your mouse, you will see the pop-ups of the different percentages of each of the different alternative fuel types. So here we see 3% of this other wedge are electric vehicles. There's also compressed natural gas, hybrid electric, and the like. So that's a good way to help cities, we hope, understand, what kinds of vehicles are traveling in their city, and maybe look at opportunities to increase perhaps electric vehicles and set some goals based on this kind of data. If you're on the website, I'm going to take you now to the Buildings and Industry tab at the top. And here, there's a lot of data that was already on the SLED site, but what I'm showing you is the data that we've added for each city. And one of those components is the small building rooftop PV potential, so photovoltaic generation potential, looking at the small rooftops. And this is basically buildings with a footprint of 5,000 square feet or less. And so in the US, that tends to be primarily single family homes. And so I've used this as a proxy for the residential sector in many cities where there is not that much multifamily. So here in Denver, Colorado, we've got, and again, if you scroll over, you see the different percentages of suitable versus unsuitable small buildings. We took this data from LIDAR data, which is flown data and imagery for 128 cities. And we looked at the rooftop PV potential from that data, and we created a methodology to extrapolate that data and apply it to every other US city, depending on their insolation, as well as, oh dear. Well, It sounds like the broadcast stopped. Can anyone
No,
still hear me?
sorry for that, Megan. It was being also broadcasted in social media at the same time. My apologies. Go on, please.
Okay. All right, sorry. So we extrapolated that flown data and estimated this PV rooftop potential for small buildings. And here in the US, we also have Google Project Sunroof now, which is modeling many different cities for every single rooftop. So that's an added data source. Again, under the Building and Industry tab on the State and Local Energy Data site, and the link is at the bottom at this page as well if you'd like to go there. We wanted to give cities a sense of what kinds of buildings do they have in their cities and what kind of use of those buildings, so that they could try to target energy efficiency programs more strategically, right? Data-based decision making. So here we've taken data that's compiled by the Federal Emergency Management Administration called the HAZAS dataset that is not really well known or used. It's kind of embedded in their GIS data. And we've extrapolated that out and provided an estimate by sector for every single US city based on the 33 different building types that FEMA has in their data set. So we provide the summary data by either number of buildings or estimated total area by sector. And then below you can break out the different sectors. And so here we're showing the types of residential buildings, which often in the US includes many single family homes, even in Berkeley, California. Again, as a way to help cities make more strategic buildings decisions as far as energy use. Below that, you'll also find what we've estimated as the top 5 electricity and natural gas consuming industries in each city. And this is taken from data, it's called the zip code business patterns from the US Census, where they look at which kinds of industries and employee classes are in each city. And so here in Port St. Lucie, Florida, again, a smaller city, we look at hospitals as the major electricity and natural gas consumers in that city. That's pretty common as single entities, hospitals are very high energy consumers. So it's just a way for cities to better understand their energy context and look at the large energy consuming industries and perhaps ways to tackle and partner with those industries to reduce energy consumption. And here is the latest and greatest. We're very excited for this new edition within the last few weeks of energy benchmarking data. I'm not sure what's going on internationally, but in the US, there's a lot of buzz and excitement around this new strategy of building energy benchmarking. And research has shown that just the act of benchmarking, meaning requiring or encouraging through voluntary programs, larger commercial buildings to report their energy consumption, often on an energy use index or intensity metric. How many BTUs do they use per square foot? That this simple act of reporting actually tends to lead to energy reductions, energy consumption reductions. And so here we've taken data from a different data source, lots of data sources coming in here. This is purchased data from CoStar Realty Information, and they have information on 4.4 million commercial buildings across the US. And so we've broken it down again by city. And below you'll see the minimum building area. So often cities will set a policy, say, okay, all commercial buildings over 25,000 square feet have to report their energy consumption on an annual basis. So here's just a way to help cities understand if they set a building disclosure ordinance, for example, at these different thresholds, how many buildings and what types of buildings would be impacted. And again, you can scroll over that with your mouse on the site and see the different parts of those bar charts. And you can look at building area or the number of buildings to better understand that energy context. And then we've taken a lot of this data and we summarized it into a greenhouse gas emissions. I'm not going to call it inventory because it's estimated and not measured and reported. But this you'll find under the emissions tab up at the top of the state and local energy data site. And it's just a way, again, to show cities a quick snapshot of estimated aggregated data so they can understand what kinds of sources are accounting for the most greenhouse gas emissions in their city. So here I've taken a look at 2 different cities, and these are cities that are kind of mid-sized. They both are in the 40 to 44,000 population range, and just wanted to compare them to see what we can learn from this, right? The charts don't look that different unless you look at the metrics and the scale below, and also the total tons. So here in Redmond, Washington, they have about half of the emissions, even though they're about the same size as Canton, Ohio. And most of that is because in Redmond, Washington, it's in the Northwest, and they have a lot of hydropower. In Canton, Ohio, they're in the Midwest, and there's a lot of coal-powered electricity generation. Also, there are differences in the emissions from vehicles on the road. It's a pretty big difference. That can come from things like the fuel economy that we looked at before, the vehicle miles traveled, etc. So it's an interesting way, again, if you scroll over these different sectors and bars, you can see the details to understand the emissions and where your particular city is having its greatest emissions factor. In the Northeast, we see that transportation has a higher emissions rate than even electricity oftentimes. And that's because, again, there's a lot of hydro in the Northeast and there's a lot of vehicle miles traveled. So a lot of congestion and vehicles on the road. Again, trying to help cities make more strategic energy decisions with these snapshots of estimated energy data. So in order to help cities take action and be more strategic, we've also compiled a local energy action toolbox. You can find this at the beginning. If you're on the website, you just hit start over and it'll take you to that entry page. And below where you enter in a city name, you can see the toolbox. And you can enter into here where we've cataloged over 500 different resources for local energy action, basically at the city level. And you can search by buildings and efficiency or renewable power and find case studies and research and tools that will inform more strategic energy decision making at the local level. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning, we took the city energy profiles and our foundational research, and we used the profiles as a massive data set on which to model what might be the impact of common city level actions that we found through our foundational research. What kinds of cities, what kind of actions are cities taking currently? And we modeled that given metrics that we found in the literature as far as impact. And we found that in aggregate, if all cities took these common level actions, we could meet 35% just with city level actions of the remaining U.S. Conference of Parties target. So this is the COP21 target for the U.S. And I'll show a little bit more about that in a minute. So that it was really interesting to compare, what is the comparative impact of these different kinds of actions. And we found that building energy codes had potentially the largest impact. And this is implementing the most recent vintage of energy codes because the building code improves on their sort of 3-year cycle, as well as implementing beyond code measures. And that's just impacting your building stock. And then public transit, this is both expanding ridership as well as service and van pools and high occupancy vehicle lanes, et cetera. that is a big opportunity for many cities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then the third, or tied for second here, is building energy incentives. So this includes things like the building energy disclosure ordinances that we found have a pretty significant impact at the city level as far as energy efficiency and greenhouse gas emissions. Less impactful, but still up there, is the smart growth. So this is things like transit-oriented development and mode shifting to walking and biking. And then we looked at solar PV policies, and these are actions aimed at private deployment of rooftop PV. So perhaps a city policy or education about an opportunity to put solar on maybe your residential roof. It's pretty minimal because we only looked at rooftop. If we added kind of bulk purchasing of larger scale PV, I think that would change significantly. And then we needed to look at municipal actions. What's the potential impact of things like increasing the fuel efficiency of the municipal vehicle fleet and perhaps putting solar on some municipal buildings. So because municipal operations tend to be only 1.5% to 2% of the total energy consumption in any city, it has a smaller, but still a lead by example impact. And then we were able to take a look at what are the kind of regional differences in those city level actions. And we found that on the northeast seaboard there is a lot higher levels of vehicle miles traveled. It's much more congested. And also it's more densely developed. So you have more of an opportunity to mode shift and have transit expansion, et cetera, and reduce those vehicle miles traveled. In the Midwest, we have very high heating and cooling loads. It's hot in the summer, it's cold in the winter, so the buildings are a much greater impact because of those higher energy consuming trends. And then in the Southwest, we have higher solar insolation, and so solar policies tend to have a greater impact compared to other cities in other parts of the country. And so here's just a breakdown of those different city level common types of actions. We're not talking about bleeding edge, only 14 cities have done these things, but we're talking about actions that we're finding in those plans and policies currently in place. And again, it's 35% of the remaining goal for the US. Okay, so that was a lot of data that we put onto the state and local energy data site. And so we wanted to help and partner with cities to understand how to use that data and how to apply it to decision-making processes. So we were able to create this data to decision-making series where we worked with 10 different cities to understand what kinds of energy questions and challenges and planning processes do they have and what are they going through. And then we worked to apply this new data and analysis to those energy questions. And so we looked at, for example, Columbia, Missouri. They wanted to look at energy actions that would have the greatest impact on reducing greenhouse gas, as well as impacts that would help with low income and moderate income households. They wanted to focus their actions in ways that would benefit their poorer population. And so we were able to take that research that I just discussed and create kind of a city-specific model where we could look at their inputs as far as how they thought the city was growing, at what growth rate, et cetera, and model the greenhouse gas abatement potential of those. We just looked at 5 different city energy action categories. And for them, public transit was very high, so that's a good opportunity for greenhouse gas reduction, as well as building energy codes. However, in the US, many times the state sets the building energy code, and so Columbia was not able to change the vintage of their building energy code to adopt the latest, but they still have enforcement power at the local level. So the city is the one, at least in Missouri, that is enforcing the building code and ensuring that new buildings and major renovations are building to code and inspecting that. So that's an opportunity for them. And then we looked at some other research that we've done here at NREL, including this is the RES stock, which is a really state-specific, fascinating way run through a supercomputer of different kinds of energy interventions that are the most cost-effective within each state. At this point, only for single-family homes, but now we're working on commercial and multifamily. So it was just a way for us to help show what kind of data was available and how it might apply to their particular energy questions. This is also some of the graphics pulled from the San Jose Energy Data to Decision-Making series. And here they were wondering, okay, what kind of rooftop potential do we have for PV generation? And how might that apply to our 100% renewable electricity goal that they have in the city? And we've found that an increasing number of U.S. cities are setting 100% renewable electricity goals, including several of the 10 that we worked with for this data to decision making. So that was one of their energy challenges that they were trying to figure out. And so we included this conceptual framework to help estimate the market potential, because technical potential tends to be very high and unrealistic. So how do you understand a better market potential to set more realistic goals? And that's most of the components that are on the City Energy Data site, the state and local energy data site. We have more coming though, and that includes, because many of the 10 cities we worked with, as well as through other avenues, we're getting a lot of requests for how do we help our energy decisions benefit our low-income population the most. And so here we've done the analysis, and we're hoping to get this chart up on the state and local energy data site soon to help cities understand what kinds of housing, as well as, you'll see in a minute, what kind of fuel types, heating fuel types, and energy burden do we have among our population. So here we're showing, and this again was an iterative proportional fitting, massive cross-tabulation, and rerunning that cross-tabulation with all the data we had at the census tract level, and then building it back up to the city level. So a lot of cities will see that most of their housing is in single-family homes. But if they indeed want to focus on their low-income population, here we see that most of their low-income population, and this is percentage of area median income, which is a housing and urban development metric, that those in the lowest 0 to 30% and 30 to 50% of area median income are primarily renters and primarily in multifamily. So regardless of whether most of your housing stock is single family, if you want to focus on low income, you need to focus on renters and you need to focus on multifamily. So it's just instructive for cities to help make more strategic energy decisions, and in this regard, particularly to help those more low-income households. So we also are modeling the energy burden. So here we have, again, owner versus renter, because that has a very significant impact on how you approach it, right? Renters don't own their buildings, so they're not incentivized to invest in energy efficiency. So we would need to figure out that what we call split incentive in that regard. So who is going to pay for the efficiency and then who pays for the utility bills is often split. So that's a challenge. But here we find that the energy burden in owner-occupied homes among the low income is much higher than the renter-occupied homes. And this is due to things like they tend to have smaller units in renter-occupied. They tend to be multifamily, as we just saw. So they have shared walls and more efficient in that regard. So if you're looking at reducing the energy burden among your lowest income population, you may need to focus on single family homes that are owner occupied. So it's a different way of tackling that problem. And here we're looking at, okay, this is New Haven, Connecticut, lots of multifamily buildings there. It's a more dense city. But what kinds of heating fuels are used. And here we see that utility gas is the highest. But then if we look at owner-occupied versus renter-occupied, and the heating fuel type, we see that fuel oil, which is common in the Northeast, is the most expensive as far as heating fuel. And so what is the least expensive? It is bottled gas, which is propane, or utility gas would be delivered via pipeline. So it's what kinds of fuel shifting do you want to focus on, and what kinds of energy efficiency measures might you target to help reduce that energy burden the most. So that's some of the data that we hope to get up to on the state and local energy data site in the near future. We've already done much of the analysis, so it's just a matter of making it live for every single city. So that is the summary of the city energy profiles as part of the CitiesLEAP project. And I hope that that might be of use to you. Here are some links and to reach the reports that we've done on both that foundational research as well as the carbon abatement potential of city level policies in the US. And ways to connect with us on Twitter and email, and my contact information there as well. So at this point, I'm really looking forward to your questions, and I will leave this up for a couple more minutes, and then we'll switch to, I'll try to see the chat box. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Megan. A fantastic presentation and an overwhelming amount of data collected. We have already a few questions, so if you want, you can stop sharing your presentation so you can access the chat.
Okay, great. Oh, thank you for posting the link. That's great. All right. So how did you construct baselines for city level projections and potentials? How did you get data on the current efficiency levels of residential buildings?
There are a few questions at the very beginning too.
Okay. Let's see. Want me to start from the beginning down here then? Oh, way up there. Okay. There we go. I'll start from the top. All right, so let's start with what data sources were used to put together the city profiles, and are these national data sources? Yes, so we actually used, as I said, a different methodology for each sector, as well as each different chart you saw. And in total, we've used about, I think, 36 different data sources, primarily U.S. Census, and within the U.S. Census, there's the American Community Survey, as well as, which does surveys of individuals. So you're sampling to understand things like how far is your commute? How much money do you make? What's your income? What's your fuel type? So we really rely on that sampling data through the American Community Survey to understand a lot of those details and model them at the census tract level. As well as I mentioned the CoStar data on commercial buildings, the FEMA HAZUS data set, that's the Federal Emergency Management Administration for building types, and certainly population from the US Census, and things like the POLC data, which is, again, is purchase data for the vehicle types. So in the state and local energy data site, you can look under each chart and it will show you sources. And so there you can get both the methodology as well as a list of the data sources for each of those charts. So what I would encourage you to look through there for the specific data sources, of which there are many. And then how often are some of these data sets updated, such as commercial activities census data? Each of those data sets has something of a different cycle for updates. The American Community Survey has like a rotating update, but it's a 5-year window. So they add data, but then they sort of publish it for like 2011 to 2015, 16, I believe. So that's kind of on a rotating basis. It's not really annual. U.S. Census has an estimate every year with the decennial census, so that's every 10 years is the major census. We use the estimate. Polk data, it depends on how often we pay for it to buy it. We've paid for it every year to date, but I don't believe we'll be buying it for the next several years, so that will not be updated. We've just added 2016 data, though, and that is the vehicle registration data. And then the CoStar data on commercial buildings, we've just purchased it for the first time, and it's pretty expensive, so I don't expect to be purchasing it every year. So those kind of things all have different time frames as far as how often they'll be updated. So I want to stress that these are all estimates, and these estimates cannot serve as an inventory and a baseline for greenhouse gas reduction planning, because they are estimates and they're not going to pick up programmatic impacts at that small level of the city scale, because they are only estimates. But if you're looking for a snapshot and a better understanding of energy consumption in each city, I think they're very useful for that purpose, as well as in aggregate as a data set on which to conduct some pretty interesting research on city level actions. So again, some people assume that we've collected this data from every single utility and it's actual data, and then that's not true. There's 23,000 cities and nearly as many utilities in the US. And so it is estimated data. And we will not be providing a time series. We're looking at the next update of this for a 2015 or 2016 vintage for most of these data sets, but we don't want to show a time series as far as the change between the two estimations, because we're probably going to try to refine and revise the methodology, and it wouldn't reflect changes accurately. So how much effort was required to collect and process all this information? Work days, oh boy. Oh, per average town. Well, we collected it all at the national level and then disaggregated it down to to census tract level, which covers the entire US. And then we kind of cookie cuttered out the city limits, so that we used a lot of state level data to true up our census tract level data. So how much effort? This is a 3-year effort. So we just wrapped up the third of 3 years for this project. So we've added all of these charts kind of incrementally as we went along over that 3 years. And nobody's working on this full time. We're all working on it part time. So I don't have a number of work days, but I will say it's about a $1.8 million project to date. So I hope that helps. And let's see. How do we construct the baselines for city level projections? Where do we get the data and the current efficiency level? So we don't really have efficiency levels of residential buildings. We estimate the energy consumption and the expenditures, and I showed you that brief chart of the methodology. Again, we're taking all of the data that we have at the census tract level and disaggregating data down to the census tract level that we have from the state level. So at the state, we have total electricity and natural gas consumption by sector, residential and commercial and industrial. And so we've disaggregated that down to the census tract level. And most of that census tract level is coming from things like zip code business patterns as well, which is a census collected data, as well as things like the American Community Survey. So, and I apologize, I'm sure many of this similar data is not available, or it is different sources in different countries. So this is very US specific. We could apply the same methodologies using different data sources to other countries and cities and states, but it would have to, rely on the different data sources and the different countries. Users of our database, employees of local authorities. Well, we're trying to get the word out so that we have a broad range of users. Our target audience was always city-level decision makers and helping them have more information. But we have had folks like the Sierra Club recently took this data to understand the potential impact of cities making 100% renewable goals and what that could look like at different scales as far as shifting those greenhouse gas emissions from dirty energy to completely clean energy. So we also have the World Resources Institute using a lot of this data, looking at subnational emissions inventories and modeling. And there's, it's open and free to the public through the state and local energy data site. So through there, I think you can have local, activists who are looking at how to make the most impact for their communities can use this to make some sort of decisions on their part. So that's also, I have heard that consultants are using this as well. So one of the members of our external review committee runs a consulting firm, and she said that when they go into a city, they use this data as just an initial snapshot to say, look, this is your context for energy consumption and emissions, and here's ways that we can help you. So yes, consultants are using it as well. And I hope more and more researchers. And then what data sets did we use to calculate the energy burdens? Okay. American Housing Survey for energy burden calculations. Okay, so we used HUD data as our metric. And so HUD has a different metric as far as, how affordable is housing. And that's the area median income. And that's different than what the census would use as far as income levels. So we used HUD for that, as well as things like all of that American Community Survey data. So we used basically every piece of data we could find at the census tract level, and we were able to integrate it all through that iterative proportional fitting methodology. And so that's where we used the income levels as well as the energy burden as far as what kinds of utility bills people had. And I think that's from the American Community Survey. So again, I would encourage you to go to, we don't have that chart up yet. Sorry. We'll have the methodology and all the data sources up when we get that up. And I hope the next couple months. So the next question is about PV rooftop potential. What is the real necessity of using LiDAR data to do it? Well, we didn't use LiDAR data for every city. Obviously, we used LiDAR data as a way to extrapolate a methodology to then estimate it for every other city. And yes, it's expensive to fly over a city and collect that kind of visual data. So this is a way to extrapolate and model with a much lower cost. But I have heard of cities paying for LiDAR data to be flown, and it's certainly helpful. So I guess that's really a matter of each individual city's priority, how detailed they want to get. And there are things like Google Project Sunroof, at least in the US, who are modeling that for free for many different cities and an expanding number of cities. So links for the reports. Yes, I believe you put them right there. Thank you.
Yes, No, and just in case, as it was mentioned at the very beginning, not only the webinar has been recorded, and it will therefore be uploaded to our webpage, but the same will go for the presentation of Megan, in which all these links are included. So we will have this upload of the recording and the PPT presentation itself by the latest tomorrow morning in our website, and you will all be informed as usual via the emails and the social media channels.
Great, thank you. Well, that's all the questions that I see. Unless there are any more, I really appreciate your time and attention, and I hope that this data and analysis can be of some use to you in city energy decision making.
Indeed. Once again, thank you very much for your presentation, Megan. We deeply appreciate it. Thank you everyone for coming. I am right now posting the link for a short survey of 2-3 minutes for you to reply if you have a little bit of time, in order to keep on improving the programs and building capacity activities we are delivering. Once again, thanks to everyone for coming. Thank you, Megan. It was a flawless, fantastic presentation, and see you all next week for the next webinar in our series of tools and methodologies for regional and municipal sustainable energy planning. Next week we have the webinar exploring integrated energy action plans for a sustainable transition in smart projects, which will contemplate 3 cases in Italy, the UK, and Evora. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening, and to you, Megan, a good morning.
Thank you.